Let's bring in Senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy. He's on the Foreign Relations Committee. Hey, Senator, always good to talk to you. We won't ask you any questions about your run for governor because obviously we have a busy agenda. What do you want to hear tomorrow? What if you could have one question answered, what would it be?
I mean, given all of the reporting about Comey's conversations with the president, I think it stands to reason that he would clear up the content of those conversations. It would be important to hear from Comey that the president did talk to him about the consequences, the personal consequences to Comey of continuing the Russia investigation. I would like to hear that from Comey, but I have low expectations, in part because we all sat in this private briefing with Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, in which he would give us nothing about the content of his communications with Trump. He wouldn't even tell us in that closed-door meeting about who he consulted in writing the memo that recommended Comey's firing. Right. And the reason for that was he said, hey, listen, this is all subject to a potential criminal obstruction of justice case. And knowing Comey, knowing how careful he normally is, he'll make a little bit of news tomorrow, but I have a feeling he's going to be just as careful as Rosenstein was, given the potential scope of Mueller's investigation.
Right. And so let me ask you what Dan Coats, former ambassador, former senator, now DNI, Dan Coats's news that broke last night. How does that impact how you're looking at this entire mess and a possible obstruction of justice charge against the President of the United States?
Well, Coates is a guy with, an ethical center. He's also a really smart and careful politician, having served in the Senate for a long time. And, you should read his statement last night very carefully, right? He says that he never has felt pressured by the president. Now, that doesn't mean that the president didn't ask him to back off to push Comey to back off the investigation. It just means that
Senator,
he didn't feel pressured.
Senator, I was going to say, Senator, it doesn't mean that the president wasn't trying to pressure him. Like, somebody could ask me to do something illegal. I wouldn't feel any pressure. I'd smile and tell him to go to hell and walk out of the room. So you're exactly right. Him saying I didn't feel any pressure has nothing to do with Donald Trump's state of mind or his intent.
Yeah, no, and I think, and frankly, I think, knowing Dan Coats, I would read his statement last night to be almost a confirmation of the fact that Trump had that conversation with him, and his failure to answer the question when it was posed to him the last time he appeared before Congress seems additional confirmation. I mean, listen, every single day it feels as if the walls are closing in here. I mean, there's not a single day in which you feel like you get further away from a very damaging truth to this president. I'll just tell you, Joe, I mean, our challenge here is to not be so obsessive on this Russia case to lose track of the fact that there are some really important things happening here in Congress in a subterranean way. The health care bill now looks like it may be on the floor of the Senate by the end of this month. And listen, I want to follow this path wherever it goes, but I don't want that to blot out everything else that we're working on here that matters, frankly, more to my constituents than this Russia story.
And we will get to some of that, and we want to talk about the weapons sale to Saudi Arabia as well, Senator. But I want to ask you, you went to law school, lawyer. What would constitute to you in this case obstruction of justice? And we have media reporting so far that shows that James Comey was asked by the President of the United States to back off the Russia investigation. Now this morning, the Washington Post, as Joe just walked through, says that Dan Coats was pressured to back off the Russia investigation. As you look at this case, what would constitute obstruction of justice?
Well, I mean, all of that feels like obstruction of justice. Of course, at this point, we have reporting. At some point, these principals will have to testify and give evidence that those conversations happened. But all of that feels like obstruction of justice. Of course, if you move that into the context of our constitutional responsibility, the question of impeachment, if we ever got there, is a political question, not a legal question. And so even if the President of the United States does meet the standard of obstruction of justice, you've got a separate question as to whether that rises to high crimes and misdemeanors. That's a pretty serious conversation, but a different one. We have to admit that.
Casey Hunt?
Senator, good morning. I want to ask you, as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, about events in the Middle East, broadly and specifically. Obviously, the president's been tweeting about what's been going on in Qatar. Interested in your take on the impact that has. And then also, you've been pretty vocal about this deal to sell arms to the Saudis and have teamed up, I think, with Senator Rand Paul, a little bit of an unusual alliance.
Well, listen, I think we're going to have a very close vote later this week on this resolution. We're objecting to a very specific portion of the $110 billion arms sale to the Saudis. It's a series of precision-guided munitions that are being used by Saudi Arabia in the Yemen bombing campaign. That's a bombing campaign that has created a famine inside Yemen. 8 million people don't have enough food to eat, and it has given room for al-Qaeda and ISIS to grow. I don't think that's in the U.S. national security interest for us to continue to participate in that civil war. I think we're going to have a very close vote in the Senate, a bipartisan vote later this week that may result in the Senate objecting to that arms sale. The dispute between the GCC and the Qataris, I think it's a really important one to understand the subtleties here. The U.S., I think, is making a mistake in going all in on the Sunni side, the Saudi side of this proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The Qataris, listen, they are not perfect actors. They do support some pretty bad people in the region, but they also try to be an intermediary between the Saudis and the Iranians. The United States should be supporting reconciliation between those two sides, not going all in with one side of that regional conflict. So I think this is a big mistake for Trump and his administration to weigh very heavily in on the Saudi side of this internal conflict. And it's interesting that his State Department, which seems to be going rogue more often than ever before, is hewing a little bit closer to the Qatari side in their statements.
Senator Murphy, this is Eddie Glaude. Could you say a little bit more about what's going on with health care and particularly what President Trump is doing with regards to what you've said, if I'm using your language correctly, sabotaging Obamacare? Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, so we've seen premium increases. We've seen insurers start to pull out of marketplaces across the country this year, and they're pretty clear as to why they're doing that. President Trump is actively sabotaging the American healthcare system. He's doing that in a number of ways. He's told the IRS to stop enforcing the individual mandate, which is what holds together a lot of these exchanges. He won't pay the insurance companies more than 1 month at a time. If you're an insurance company, why would you stay in these marketplaces? And so insurers are pushing up rates and rethinking exchanges because of this sabotage. And you know what Trump's trying to do is to create a crisis that will force the Congress to rewrite the entire rules of the game. I don't think he's going to get away with it. I think the American people see what's happening, but the Senate is now potentially moving to a vote in a few weeks on a bill that maybe doesn't take coverage away from 23 million people like the House did, but might take coverage away from 15 million. And I think we've got to make sure that our focus and the media's focus is on that as much as it is on this unfolding Russia story.
All right, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, always appreciate your time. Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.